Welcome to the U.S. English Lab. Let's master your English together.
You know, usually when you study for something, there is this very comforting expectation of a direct, linear return on your investment.
Right, like a one-to-one ratio of effort to results.
Exactly. Like with engineering or accounting or, even just basic math. You study the formula for calculating the area of a circle.
Pi times radius squared.
Yeah, you memorize it, and then you just apply it. It's clean. It's totally logical.
And that expectation makes complete sense for almost every academic subject we encounter in the traditional school system, right? You read the textbook, you pass the test, you possess the knowledge.
Input equals output.
Exactly.
Right. But then you step into the world of learning English or, any foreign language, really. You spend years studying the grammar rules. You highlight the textbooks until they are glowing neon yellow.
I've seen those textbooks.
You memorize massive vocabulary lists on flashcards. You ace the written exams, getting an A+ on all your verb conjugations. And then you're out in the real world.
The ultimate test.
Yeah, you're standing in a coffee shop in London or New York, and a native speaker walks up to you, completely unprompted, and just says something incredibly basic like, "Hey, how's it going?"
And the system completely crashes.
It is a total blue screen of death. You just freeze.
100%.
You know the words, you know the rules. I mean, if I handed you a piece of paper right then and there, you could write a beautiful response. But in that exact second, your mouth refuses to cooperate.
Your heart starts pounding.
Yeah, you stare at them like a deer in headlights, and you end up mumbling something completely incoherent. It's infuriating because the machinery is clearly in there, but the operational execution just stalls out.
It is the absolute definition of a cognitive traffic jam. And it's a universal experience for language learners. What's happening there isn't a failure of intelligence or, a lack of studying.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, it's a fundamental mismatch between the type of knowledge you built and the type of neurological process required to deploy it.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to completely rewire how you listening to this right now, approach English.
We are going to dismantle the traditional, painful, and honestly frustrating ways of learning this language.
And we're replacing them with a blueprint to stop overthinking and start talking. We have an absolutely massive stack of sources today.
Ours go goldmine.
We are pulling from cutting-edge neurobiology, cognitive psychology, the secret methods of hyperpolyglots.
Those are the people who speak 10 languages flawlessly, by the way.
Right, those aliens among us. And surprisingly enough, we're even looking at the storytelling frameworks of viral YouTube videos.
What's fascinating here is that by synthesizing these seemingly completely unrelated fields, we uncover the literal mechanics of the human brain. We are going to move away from treating language like a math equation to be solved on paper.
And start treating it like the biological, psychological, and physical phenomenon that it actually is. By the end of this deep dive, you won't just understand how to become fluent. You are going to understand the exact gears turning inside your own head. You'll know why you freeze, and more importantly, how to guarantee you never freeze again.
So before we can build fluency, we have to understand that exact moment in the coffee shop.
We have to understand the freeze. And I know from looking at our sources that it comes down to how our memory works, but not in the way we usually think about it.
To understand the freeze, we really have to look closely at the neurobiology of how our brains store and retrieve information. According to the research in our cognitive psychology sources, human memory isn't just one giant filing cabinet where everything gets tossed together.
Right, it's not just a big, messy drawer.
No, it is strictly divided into dual systems. You have declarative memory on one side and procedural memory on the other. And traditional language instruction fundamentally misunderstands which one of these systems is actually responsible for speaking.
So if I'm reading the biology right, declarative memory is sort of like my brain's encyclopedia.
That's a great way to put it.
It's housed mostly in the medial temporal lobe and the hippocampus, right? This is where I store raw facts. The capital of France, my best friend's birthday, my social security number.
And crucially, this is where the traditional classroom puts grammar rules and vocabulary lists.
Yes, exactly. When you sit at a desk and actively memorize that the past tense of the verb walk is walked, or you memorize a list of your regular verbs, you are encoding that data straight into your declarative memory.
It's explicit knowledge, it is highly reliable, but it requires conscious, deliberate effort to retrieve.
Which means it's slow. If I need a fact from my declarative memory, I have to mentally walk into the library, find the right aisle, pull out the encyclopedia, and look up the rule.
And that delay is the core of the problem.
Yeah.
Because while declarative memory is handling the encyclopedia, procedural memory, which is managed by entirely different brain regions, specifically the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, that's handling your skills.
Right.
Procedural memory governs patterns, motor functions, and autopilot behaviors.
Like riding a bike or typing on a keyboard or even tying your shoes. You aren't consciously thinking about the incredibly complex sequence of muscle contractions required to balance on a bicycle.
If you started thinking about it, you'd probably fall over.
That's the key trait of procedural memory, isn't it? It operates below the level of conscious thought.
It is incredibly fast, practically instantaneous, but it is very slow to build. It requires extensive physical repetition to forge those neural pathways.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if speaking a language fluently is happening in real time at high speed, it clearly has to be a procedural skill.
Yes.
But we've all been taught English as a declarative subject like history or science. We're taught a set of facts and rules to be memorized.
Which creates a massive bottleneck.
Oh.
Our linguistic sources highlight the critical difference between what they call translational production and direct L2 production.
Okay.
When you rely on the declarative memory you built in school, you are forced into translational production.
Let me guess how this feels, because I'm pretty sure I do this all the time. If I'm doing translational production, I have a thought in my native language first. Let's say I want to tell someone I went to the store.
Okay, a very common sentence.
I think the concept in my mother tongue. Then I consciously reach into my declarative memory dictionary to find the English word for store. Then I retrieve the word for go.
Right, you're assembling the pieces.
Then I realize it happened yesterday, so I have to access my grammar rules to find the past tense of go, which is irregular, so I dig up went. I arrange these words based on English syntax rules, and then I finally send the signal to my mouth to speak.
And while you are performing that exhausting sequence of mental gymnastics, the person you were talking to has been staring at you in silence for 5 full seconds.
Which feels like an absolute eternity in a conversation.
It really does.
It's like, imagine you are standing out in the field playing baseball. A batter hits a fly ball right at you. If you are using your procedural memory, you just run and catch the ball. Your brain calculates everything automatically.
You don't think about it.
Right. But traditional language learning is like trying to consciously calculate the physics of gravity, wind resistance, and the mathematical trajectory arc of the ball in real time before you're allowed to move your glove.
You're going to take a baseball straight to the face.
Exactly.
And this phenomenon is documented in cognitive science as declarative interference.
Declarative interference.
Yes. The moment you start consciously thinking about the explicit mechanics of a practice task, you actively disrupt your procedural autopilot. The declarative memory actually gets in the way.
Wow.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it perfectly explains the great paradox of language learners. It's why you can easily pass a written grammar test, which gives you infinite time to access that declarative encyclopedia, but completely fail to hold a basic 2-minute conversation.
Because conversation doesn't give you time.
Exactly. Direct L2 production, which is what native English speakers do, bypasses that translation and assembly process entirely. They conceptualize the thought directly in English, utilizing automated patterns stored in their procedural memory.
Well, hold on. If we just abandon all the rules, how do we know what we're saying is correct? I can hear the frustration from the listener who just spent 3 years studying verb tenses. Are we saying grammar is entirely useless, that they should just burn their textbooks right now?
We don't need to burn them, but we drastically need to reassign their role in the brain. The renowned linguist Stephen Kreischen addresses this exact panic with his monitor hypothesis.
A monitor hypothesis.
Kreischen proposes that our conscious, explicitly learned grammar, all those rules in your declarative memory acts, only as an internal editor. He calls it the monitor. The crucial thing to understand is that the monitor does not initiate speech.
Oh.
It only checks the speech after the fact, right before it leaves your mouth.
So it's like a proofreader sitting at the end of the conveyor belt.
Yes. And here is the catch. Kreischen found that this internal monitor only functions if 3 very specific, highly restrictive conditions are met. First, you must have sufficient time.
Which you don't in conversation.
Right. Second, you must be explicitly focused on form or correctness, rather than just trying to get your point across. And third, you must actually know the specific rule for the exception you are dealing with.
Which, again, almost never happens in a fast-paced, real-life conversation at a loud dinner party. You do not have the luxury of time to consult your internal proofreader.
You don't. And Krashen actually categorizes language learners into 3 types based on how heavily they rely on this internal proofreader. First, we have the overusers.
I feel attacked already.
These are typically the perfectionists. They consult their internal grammar rulebook before every single syllable they utter.
Oh, I know these people. I've been this person. The result is just incredibly hesitant, halting speech. You say a word, pause, look up at the ceiling, calculate the next word, say it, realize you used the wrong preposition, stop, apologize, and correct yourself.
It's painful to experience, and it's painful to listen to.
Because their monitor is constantly interrupting the flow of procedural output.
Precisely. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the underusers. These are usually your highly extroverted learners who rely entirely on what simply feels right.
Okay, I know these guys too.
They don't use their conscious grammar rules at all.
These are the people who will just happily talk your ear off in broken, completely grammatically incorrect English, but they are totally unbothered by their mistakes. They just want to communicate.
And interestingly, underusers actually acquire the language much faster in the long run.
Really? Why?
Because they are constantly practicing rapid procedural output. They're building the neural pathways, even if some of the bricks are crooked. But ultimately, the goal is to become the third type, the optimal user.
Which sounds ideal.
An optimal user is someone who uses the monitor to polish a formal written email or to double-check a prepared speech, but they effectively turn the proofreader off during casual conversation so it doesn't interfere with their fluency.
This makes so much sense when you look at it through the lens of cognitive load theory, which our sources mention is a framework developed by John Sweller.
Yes, John Sweller.
If I'm piecing this together, we only have so much working memory, like the mental RAM in a computer, available at any given second. If we run too many background applications, the computer crashes.
Sweller's cognitive load theory is arguably the most important lens through which to view language learning. Working memory is where your active, conscious thinking happens, and it is notoriously limited. Most humans can only hold about 4 to 7 chunks of information in their working memory at once.
That's tiny.
It is. Sweller breaks cognitive load down into 3 distinct types. First is intrinsic load. This is the inherent, unavoidable difficulty of the material itself.
Right, like the fact that English has some weird vowel sounds or irregular verbs. You can't change the language. It is what it is.
Exactly. You can't lower the intrinsic load, but you can manage how much of it you try to process at one time. The second type is extraneous load.
Extraneous meaning extra, unnecessary stuff.
Yes. This is unnecessary mental effort caused by bad instructional design or environmental distractions. Trying to learn a complex grammar rule while listening to loud music, or reading a textbook that is formatted with tiny, confusing text.
Or, in the context of our coffee shop scenario, the extraneous load is the panic of trying to simultaneously translate from your native language, remember a grammar exception, worry about your accent, and worry about the barista judging you.
Your mental RAM is being devoured by all these background processes.
And when your working memory fills up with too much intrinsic and extraneous load, you simply hit cognitive capacity. The system crashes, you freeze.
And this is tragic, because the third type of cognitive load, the one we actually want to maximize, is called germane load.
Germane load, meaning the mental effort that actually helps us learn.
Yes. Germane load is the productive, deep processing devoted to recognizing patterns, making connections, and building long-term schemas in the brain. When your working memory is overloaded by translating and applying grammar rules, your germane load drops to absolute zero. Learning completely stops. You are just surviving the interaction.
So, what does this all mean? If building sentences from scratch using declarative grammar rules overloads our working memory and causes the freeze, what is the alternative? How do native speakers talk so incredibly fast without their working memory exploding?
They aren't superhuman, I promise.
Right. They have the same mental RAM we do.
This brings us to the ultimate antidote for freezing. Native speakers do not build sentences from scratch. They simply don't.
They don't.
No. They rely on massive libraries of what researchers call formulaic sequences, or more commonly, chunks. This concept fundamentally disrupted linguistics, championed by researchers like Alison Ray, Andrew Pauly, Frances Hodgett Sider, and John Sinclair.
I read this part of the notes, and honestly, the concept of chunks changes everything. It's a total paradigm shift.
John Sinclair's work on this is particularly illuminating. He proposed that there are 2 complementary principles of language production: The first is the open choice principle.
Open choice.
This is the traditional grammar book view of language. It treats a sentence like a series of empty slots, and you fill each slot word by word, choosing the vocabulary and applying the grammar rules to link them together.
Which, as we just established, requires a massive amount of conscious processing power. It's exhausting.
Right. So Sinclair argued that the open choice principle is not how we usually speak. Instead, he proposed the idiom principle.
The idiom principle.
This principle states that language users have a vast mental store of semi-preconstructed phrases that function as single choices. Even if a phrase looks like it can be analyzed into smaller grammatical segments, the brain just pulls the whole thing out as one block.
Wait, just to give the listener a sense of the scale of this, our sources point to research by Britt Ehrman and Beatrice Warren. They analyzed natural speech and found that prefabricated word combinations, these chunks make up roughly 50 to 80% of native running text.
It is an incredible statistic.
I want to repeat that because it's mind-blowing. Up to 4/5 of everything a native English speaker says is basically a pre-recorded soundbite. They aren't inventing the language, they were just hitting play on a playlist of phrases.
And there is robust psycholinguistic evidence backing it up. Studies utilizing eye-tracking technology and self-paced reading tests consistently show that both native and non-native speakers process these formulaic sequences vastly faster than they process novel, newly constructed phrases of the exact same length.
Because the brain recognizes the whole phrase as one thing.
The brain has a dual route system. When it recognizes a familiar chunk, it completely bypasses the slow analytical grammar route and sends the chunk straight through a fast, direct retrieval route.
Okay, let's break down exactly what these chunks look like in real life, because it's not just idioms like it's raining cats and dogs.
No, not at all.
The sources outline 4 main types of formulaic sequences.
The classification is helpful to see how pervasive this is. First, we have multi-word items. These are tight, fixed phrases, things like once in a while, or nuts and bolts, or by and large.
You don't think about the word while. In isolation, the whole 4-word phrase is one unit of meaning.
Right. And the second type is institutionalized utterances.
That's a mouthful.
It just means the social gambits, the conversational glue we use 100 times a day. Phrases like, how are you? Or nice to meet you? Or I'll get right on it. You don't stop to analyze the grammatical function of the infinitive to meet in nice to meet you. You just deploy the phrase because you want to convey politeness.
Precisely. And this is where we can see the massive efficiency of the idiom principle. You expend almost zero working memory to deploy an institutionalized utterance. It's like, instead of going out to a forest, chopping down a tree with an axe, hauling the wood back, measuring it, cutting it, and nailing it together to make a chair, which is exactly what the grammar translation method feels like. Learning chunks is just going to IKEA, buying the pre-assembled chair, bringing it home, and sitting in it.
That is the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And because that chair is already built, you save an immense amount of cognitive energy that you can instead use to focus on the actual conversation, the body language of the person you're speaking to, or the environment around you. You aren't trapped inside your own head.
Okay, what's the third type of chunk?
The third type gets slightly more complex. They're called phrasal constraints. These are frameworks with a changeable internal structure.
Like fill in the blank.
Yes. A classic example is, if I were you, I would. And then you just fill in the final blank. Or, a year ago, I didn't know anything about.
You're just slotting in the final piece. And the fourth type?
Sentence builders. These are lexical phrases that set up the entire architecture of a thought. Things like, my point is that. Or, on the other hand, they allow you to organize complex arguments without having to think about the structural grammar of the transition.
Okay, I have to push back a little here on behalf of the listener. If I only learn pre-made phrases, aren't I just becoming a robot? Like a walking soundboard repeating catchphrases? What if I want to say something highly specific and unique about my life? I don't want to just spit out cliches.
That's the most common concern people have when they hear about chunking. But what's fascinating here is the concept of strong language generating capacity.
Strong language generating capacity, okay.
Chunks are not dead ends. They are highly flexible, dynamic templates. In cognitive linguistics and construction grammar, researchers talk about semantic frames and valencies.
Wait, valencies? That sounds like high school chemistry. What is a valency in language?
Think of valency like the little connector bumps on the top of a Lego brick.
Oh, I like Lego.
A chunk has a specific shape, and it expects a specific type of word to connect to it. Let's take a simple chunk, generally speaking. Once your procedural memory has absorbed that pattern, You unconsciously understand its valency. You know what type of word fits in that first slot.
Ah, so because I know, generally speaking, my brain automatically knows it can swap the front part to generate honestly speaking, or frankly speaking, or broadly speaking, or strictly speaking.
Yes.
I don't need to know what an adverb is. I just know the shape of the Lego brick.
Exactly. By internalizing one foundational chunk, you instantly give yourself the architecture to generate dozens of related, highly idiomatic phrases. You bypass declarative memory completely. You reduce your cognitive load. And most importantly, you achieve what Polly and Sider call native-like selection.
What does native-like selection mean in practice?
Well, a grammar rulebook might tell you that the sentence, "It is my honest desire to become joined in matrimony with you," is perfectly grammatically correct English. It follows all the rules.
But a native speaker will almost never say that.
Right. They will choose the highly frequent chunk, "I want to marry you." Relying on chunks guarantees that you don't just sound grammatically correct, you sound natural. You sound like you belong.
Okay, so the logic is bulletproof. The traditional grammar-first approach creates a cognitive bottleneck, and absorbing formulaic sequences chunks is the antidote that unlocks speed and naturalness.
It really is.
But that raises a massive logistical problem. If a language is made up of tens of thousands of chunks, how on earth do you gather them? If a learner just goes to Google and downloads a PDF of 1,000 common English idioms, they're going to drown in random vocabulary lists all over again. How do we engineer this for a real person with a real life?
This is where we have to transition from abstract linguistic theory into a highly practical daily application. The solution, which is heavily highlighted in our hyperpolyglot sources, is a brilliant instructional framework developed by the linguist Boris Shechtman. He calls it the creation of language islands.
A language island. I love that terminology. It sounds like a safe haven. So how do we actually build one of these islands?
An island is a highly personalized, heavily rehearsed collection of sentences revolving around a single specific topic that genuinely matters to your daily life. We're talking about a script of roughly 30 to 40 sentences dedicated to a real-world scenario you are guaranteed to encounter.
So instead of learning how to ask for directions to the library, which no one has done since 2005 because we have smartphones, you build an island about something real.
Yes. You build an island for introducing yourself and your specific family. You build an island describing the exact details of your job. You build an island for ordering your highly specific coffee order or explaining your obscure hobby to a stranger.
The key word there is specific. I remember reading in the sources how traditional textbooks fail because they force everyone to learn generic impersonal phrases. The apple is red. The cat is on the table.
Right, the brain rejects that.
Unless you are an interior decorator obsessed with fruit, your brain does not care about those sentences. They have zero emotional resonance. But an island is uniquely yours.
If we connect this back to cognitive psychology, memory encoding is vastly stronger when the information has personal relevance and emotional salience. An island built for a freelance graphic designer who loves rock climbing is going to have completely different chunks than an island built for a pediatric nurse who loves baking.
It's totally customized.
Your island contains the exact phrasing that reflects your personality, your sense of humor, and your daily reality.
It's like, if you imagine having a spontaneous conversation in a foreign language, it feels like swimming out in the open ocean. Yeah. It's chaotic, the waves are unpredictable, the currents are dragging you around, and you are frantically treading water just trying to survive the interaction. It is cognitively exhausting. But your prepared topics, your islands, are dry land.
I like this visualization. How does the learner use the dry land?
Well, let's say you're treading water in a conversation and the other person asks, "So what do you do for work?" Suddenly, you swim straight to your job island. You stand up on the solid sand. You know every rock and tree on this island.
You're safe.
Yeah, you can suddenly speak for 2 straight minutes with total fluency, native-like pronunciation, and complete confidence because you have rehearsed that exact conversational territory 100 times. You get to rest, catch your breath, and let your confidence soar before you dive back into the unpredictable waters of the rest of the conversation.
That is exactly how Shechtman intended the concept to be used. And it leads to a very concrete, highly motivating milestone. According to the data gathered from polyglots in our sources, the magic number for achieving high conversational fluency is roughly 1,000 personal sentences.
Just 1,000.
If one island is about 30 sentences long, you only need to build roughly 30 to 35 islands to cover almost every standard conversational scenario you will face in your daily life.
Wait, just 30 islands? That is incredibly achievable. If you just build one island a week, You are conversationally fluent in less than 8 months. But let me clarify something the sources mentioned because I don't want people to misunderstand. They talk about the difference between active sentences and passive sentences. We aren't claiming you only need to know 1,000 sentences total to survive in English, right?
No, absolutely not. That is a vital distinction to make. Your language islands constitute your active vocabulary pool. These are the 1,000 specific sentences you need to be able to produce out loud, on demand, flawlessly, without thinking.
The ones you physically speak.
They require massive investment. However, you will also possess thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of passive sentences.
Which are all the sentences you pick up from watching Netflix, listening to podcasts, or reading articles.
Exactly. You only need to understand those passive sentences when you hear them. You do not need to possess the neurological pathways to produce them yourself. The mistake that causes so many learners to burn out is trying to treat all input as active.
Right, trying to memorize everything.
They hear a complex phrase in a movie and think, I must memorize how to say that. That overloads the system.
Yeah.
You only need to produce your islands.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty step-by-step of building an island because I want to challenge one of the instructions in the blueprint. The method says you pick a topic, say your job, and step 1 is to write out 30 sentences about it. But step 2 says to write those sentences in your native language first. Wait a second. Didn't we just spend the entire first 20 minutes of this deep dive establishing that translational production translating from your mother tongue to English is the ultimate enemy of fluency? Doesn't writing it in your native language trigger that exact bottleneck we are trying to avoid?
This raises a very important question, and it shows you're tracking the cognitive theory perfectly. It seems like a paradox. But the key difference lies entirely in when and where the translation happens. If you try to translate on the fly, in real time, while standing in front of a native speaker, your working memory overloads. You freeze. But when you are building a language island, you are translating offline in a completely safe, stress-free environment at your desk.
So you are front-loading the cognitive heavy lifting.
Precisely. You write the 30 sentences in your native language first to ensure they capture your exact personality, your nuances, and the specific way you express yourself. You want the core ideas to be authentically yours. If you try to write them in English first, you will inevitably dumb down your thoughts to match whatever limited English vocabulary you currently have.
Okay. I get it. So I write my brilliant, funny, nuanced thoughts in my native language. Then what?
Once you have those authentic thoughts mapped out, you translate them into flawless, highly idiomatic English chunks. This is where you might use a tutor, a native-speaking friend, or a high-quality AI translation tool to ensure the English is natural, not literal. Then, and this is the crucial step that resolves your concern, you memorize the English chunks so deeply that you bypass the translation process entirely when it's time to speak.
So you cut the cord.
You map the English chunk directly to the abstract concept in your brain, severing the tie to the native words.
It's a one-time translation to establish the meaning, and then relentless repetition takes over to build the procedural muscle memory.
Exactly. You can establish a very manageable weekly routine. On Monday, you write the native sentences and get them translated. On Tuesday and Wednesday, you engage in purely passive listening.
Passive listening to your own island.
Yes. You record the English sentences and play them on a loop while you commute, do the dishes, or walk the dog. You let the rhythm and intonation wash over your auditory cortex. This perfectly manages the intrinsic cognitive load. Then, on Thursday and Friday, you move to active recall, testing yourself to produce the English chunks purely from memory.
Which brings us to the next massive hurdle. Let's say I've done all that. I have my custom scripts. I have 30 islands mapped out. My declarative memory understands the grammar, and I know what the chunks mean. But how do I physically move those English sentences from the cognitive centers of my brain down into the physical muscles of my mouth, jaw, and tongue so they actually sound natural?
The physical execution.
Right. Because knowing what you want to say and having the physical muscle coordination to say it with a smooth accent are two completely different beasts.
This is where the methodology transitions from cognitive planning to intense physical training. Because speaking a language is, in many ways, an athletic endeavor. You are coordinating dozens of tiny muscles. To train that articulatory machinery, our sources point to a highly specific, notoriously rigorous method known as shadowing.
Shadowing. It sounds like a CIA training tactic from a spy movie.
Its origins are almost as intense as that. Shadowing was originally developed in the 1950s as a training protocol for simultaneous interpreters at the United Nations.
Wait, the people who sit in the little glass booths and have to listen to a diplomat speaking in Russian and instantly speak the translation in English while the diplomat is still talking?
Yes, those interpreters. It is widely considered one of the most cognitively demanding tasks that the human brain can perform. But for general language learners, the technique was adapted and popularized by the hyperpolyglot Alexander Argyll. Shadowing, in its purest form, is the process of listening to an audio recording of a native speaker and repeating what they are saying out loud over the recording with a delay of only a fraction of a second.
Hang on. Over the recording, you don't hit pause.
You absolutely do not pause it. This is the fundamental critical difference between true shadowing and the traditional listen and repeat exercises you find in old language lab tapes or apps like Duolingo.
Okay, let's contrast those because I think a lot of people assume they are the same thing. I remember high school Spanish. The cassette tape would say, "Hola, ¿cómo estás?" Then there would be a loud beep and a 5-second silence for me to say, "Hola, ¿cómo estás?" And then it would move to the next phrase.
Listen and repeat gives you the luxury of time. It allows your brain to stop, process the auditory input, consciously retrieve your declarative rules about pronunciation, and then carefully, slowly articulate the phrase.
So it's still using the wrong system.
It is deliberate and analytical. It's useful for absolute beginners trying to hear a new vowel sound for the first time, but it does absolutely nothing to build real-time procedural fluency.
It's like if you want to be a professional tennis player, listen and repeat is like practicing your swing in slow motion in your living room. Shadowing is getting on the court and trying to return a serve traveling at 100 miles an hour.
Exactly. Shadowing forces concurrent processing. By forcing you to speak while the audio is still continuously playing, you activate a specific cognitive mechanism called the phonological loop.
Oh, wait, pause for a second. Phonological loop. That sounds like a roller coaster at a water park. What is it actually doing inside my head?
The phonological loop is a component of your working memory. Think of it as a temporary audio buffer, like a 2-second tape recorder in your brain. When you hear speech, it holds the raw sounds there just long enough for you to process them.
Okay, I follow.
When you shadow at full speed, you're keeping that buffer constantly full and constantly discharging it to your mouth. You simply do not have the time to consciously translate or analyze the grammar. You are forced to bypass the slow, analytical prefrontal cortex and directly mimic the rhythm, the pitch, the stress, and the physical phonemes of the native speaker.
So it's essentially like lip syncing to your favorite pop song in the car, where you are trying to match the singer's exact breath and timing and emotion, except you're actually singing out loud.
That is a very accurate way to conceptualize it. And because it is so cognitively demanding, you can't just jump straight into full-speed shadowing. The polyglot sources outline a very deliberate 7-step method to build up the neurological pathways safely.
Walk me through the 7 steps. Let's say I want to shadow the audio recording of my job island tomorrow morning. What is step 1?
Step 1 is purely active listening. You sit down, close your eyes, and play the 1 or 2 minute audio clip without speaking at all. You just let your brain map the overall melody, the cadence, and the emotional tone of the speaker. Step 2 is slow reading. You take the written transcript of your island and you read it aloud at your own comfortable pace to resolve any unfamiliar vocabulary and highlight where the chunks are.
Okay, so steps 1 and 2 are just getting the lay of the land, setting up the map.
Yes. Then the actual shadowing begins with step 3, sentence by sentence shadowing with the text. You play one sentence of the audio, you pause it, and you repeat it immediately while looking at the words. Your goal here is to match the pitch and rhythm exactly.
Got it.
Step 4, remove the safety net. Sentence by sentence, blind shadowing. You do the exact same thing, pausing after each sentence, but you turn the paper over. You cannot look at the text.
Why take the text away? Doesn't that just make it harder to know what to say?
It makes it harder, but for a crucial neurological reason. When you read text while listening, your visual cortex often overrides your auditory cortex. You will pronounce the word the way it looks on the page, rather than the way it actually sounds.
Oh, and English is notorious for this. Words like knight or colonel look nothing like they sound.
Blind shadowing forces your brain to rely purely on the raw acoustic data.
That makes total sense. So after we train the ears, we move to step 5.
Step 5 is the crucible, full-speed parallel shadowing. You play the entire audio continuously without stopping, and you speak along with it, maintaining that tiny fraction of a second lag. You echo the speaker in real time.
That sounds intense.
Step 6 is comparative recording. You set up your phone, record yourself doing full-speed shadowing, and then play your voice side by side with the native speaker. This provides instant objective feedback to identify where your tongue is still stumbling. Finally, step 7 is spaced repetition. You shadow that exact same 2-minute clip for 3 to 5 consecutive days to permanently consolidate those neuromuscular articulation patterns.
Okay, I have to jump in here with a major question. If I'm just mimicking sounds at full speed, lagging behind like a parrot, how am I actually learning English? If I don't have time to think about what the words mean, aren't I just making meaningless noises with my mouth?
It's a very common pushback, but it misunderstands the goal of the exercise. For this, we look to Merrill Swain's output hypothesis. Swain argues that being pushed to physically produce language, even through mimicry, forces learners to process the language much deeper than passive listening ever could.
Deeper how?
When you shadow, you will physically feel the gaps in your knowledge. You will literally stumble over a cluster of consonants, or you'll run out of breath because you didn't realize a chunk extended that long.
So the physical struggle acts like a diagnostic tool.
Exactly. It highlights precisely what your procedural memory hasn't mapped yet. And remember, you already did the slow reading and comprehension work in steps 1 and 2. The declarative meaning of the words is already established in your brain. Shadowing is not about learning new vocabulary. It's about fusing the meaning you already know with the physical, muscular execution required to say it at the speed of life.
That is a massive distinction. You are training the physical machinery, not the dictionary. And I read something wild in the sources about how Alexander Argos actually performed his shadowing routine. He didn't just sit quietly at a desk in his study. He insisted on intense physical movement. He would go outside and walk briskly like power walking posture through a public park, shouting his target language out loud. Aside from looking like a crazy person to his neighbors, why on earth would he do that?
What's fascinating here is the direct neurobiological connection between movement and memory consolidation. On a basic physiological level, engaging in brisk physical movement increases blood flow, oxygenation, and overall neurological arousal in the brain. It primes the system for learning.
He wakes you up.
But more importantly, it directly targets and challenges your procedural memory system.
How so? Because walking is procedural.
Exactly. Walking is a highly automated procedural motor skill. Speaking a language fluently must also become an automated procedural motor skill. By forcing the brain to manage both of these complex procedural tasks simultaneously, you are driving the linguistic motor patterns incredibly deep into the basal ganglia. You are literally training your brain to automate the language to the point where you can walk and talk effortlessly, just like you do in your native language.
That is just incredible. Okay, so if I'm tracking the master plan here, we have the chunks, which allow us to bypass the slow grammar rules. We have the language islands, which give us a personalized, highly relevant territory to speak about. And we have the shadowing technique to physically train our articulatory muscles to sound native. From a purely mechanical standpoint, it sounds like we have built the perfect machine.
It's a very robust system.
But humans aren't machines. What happens when the real world hits? You've practiced in your bedroom, you've walked around the park shouting your islands, but then you step up to an actual human being. Maybe it's a high-stakes job interview or a first date, or you're just ordering coffee in a crowded cafe with a line of impatient people behind you, and suddenly your heart rate spikes. Your palms sweat.
The panic sets in.
And your mind goes completely, utterly blank from sheer panic. All that procedural memory you trained just evaporates.
This is perhaps the most critical barrier of all, and it is entirely emotional. You are describing the sudden, violent activation of what Stephen Krashen termed the affective filter.
The affective filter, let's unpack this mechanism. What exactly is this filter and what is it filtering out?
The affective filter is an invisible psychological gate situated in the brain. Krashen's hypothesis posits that emotional variables, specifically high anxiety, deep boredom, low self-esteem, or lack of motivation, directly and physically impact the brain's ability to acquire or produce language.
Wait, it's a physical block?
Yes. When those negative emotions spike, the gate slams shut. It literally blocks comprehensible input from reaching the language acquisition device, or LAD, in the brain.
So if my filter is up, it's like trying to drink from a fire hose while wearing a heavy-duty waterproof gas mask. The water is hitting me, the English language is swirling all around me, but absolutely nothing is getting into my system.
Yes, the input bounces right off. If the filter is up, all your grammatical knowledge, all your perfectly rehearsed chunks, all your shadowing practice becomes completely inaccessible. On a neurological level, the brain perceives the social stress as a literal threat.
Like a predator.
It shifts into an amygdala-driven fight-or-flight survival mode, reallocating blood flow and resources away from the prefrontal cortex, where complex language processing occurs, and into the primal survival centers. Your brain shuts down language to prepare you to run away from the barista.
That is hilarious, but also tragic because it feels so real. So what triggers this filter to slam shut? Why does language learning feel so uniquely threatening to adults?
In traditional educational settings, the triggers are ubiquitous and baked into the system. Error correction is a massive one. Being publicly corrected for a grammar mistake in front of 30 peers induces intense embarrassment, immediately raising the filter. It attacks your ego.
Ugh, I remember that from school.
Another massive trigger is forcing output too early. Krashen talks extensively about the silent period, a necessary phase where a learner just needs to absorb the language through listening before being forced to speak. Breaking that silent period by forcing a beginner to talk creates immense, paralyzing anxiety.
Because they just aren't ready.
Finally, a lack of comprehensible input resulting in sheer boredom is a trigger. If a textbook is completely over your head, you zone out, you feel stupid, and the filter goes up to protect your self-esteem.
So what does this all mean for the independent learner? Let's say I'm not in a classroom. I'm just sitting alone on my couch using a language app or watching a YouTube video. There is no teacher to embarrass me. Can my affective filter still trigger? Who am I anxious about?
This raises a very important point, because the filter is not just a shield against external social pressure. It is also triggered by internal frustration.
Internal frustration.
The cognitive overload we discussed in Section 1, trying to juggle declarative grammar rules, translate vocabulary, nail the pronunciation all at the exact same time, creates a deep, visceral sense of internal failure. When you stumble over your words while sitting alone in your room, you experience self-frustration. Your self-esteem takes a hit.
You start telling yourself a narrative.
Exactly. I'm just bad at languages. I'm too old for this. I'll never get it.
That internal negative narrative raises the affective filter just as effectively as a harsh teacher with a red pen.
Wow. So even if you are entirely alone, if the study method you are using is too cognitively heavy, you are essentially traumatizing your own language learning process.
Right.
You are teaching your brain to hate English. Precisely. This is why managing cognitive load is intimately biologically tied to managing the affective filter. When you reduce the extraneous cognitive load by relying on chunks and practicing well-known islands, you drastically reduce your internal frustration. You feel competent. And when you feel competent, the filter naturally lowers.
Okay, so cognitive ease lowers the filter indirectly, but how do we intentionally, actively lower it in the moment? We can't just tell ourselves, don't be anxious. That is the worst advice in human history. If someone tells you to calm down, your blood pressure immediately skyrockets.
Indeed, suppression doesn't work. One of the most powerful, evidence-based weapons against the affective filter is something that is tragically missing from almost all serious language classrooms.
Humor.
Humor. Finally, we have scientific, peer-reviewed justification for goofing off.
It is far more powerful than just goofing off. According to research from instructional design studies and platforms like the e-learning coach, instructional humor triggers profound neurobiological effects. When you laugh, your brain releases a cascade of endorphins and dopamine.
The feel-good chemicals. Endorphins promote social bonding and drastically reduce the psychological distance between the speaker and the listener. Crucially, endorphins mitigate anxiety. Laughter physically relaxes the muscular tension in the vocal tract and signals the amygdala that the environment is safe.
So if you can find a way to laugh, either at the material, with your tutor, or just at your own mistakes, your affective filter is essentially chemically forced to open.
Yes. Furthermore, studies by researchers like Abner Ziv have demonstrated that humor sparks divergent thinking. It creates a playful cognitive mood that encourages unusual responses, risk-taking, and creativity. This is exactly the kind of cognitive flexibility you need to navigate the unpredictable waters of a foreign language conversation. You need to be willing to play with the words.
But not all humor is created equal, right? I can't just translate a knock-knock joke into English and suddenly expect my brain to absorb 50 new vocabulary words.
Correct. The research draws a sharp line between contiguous humor and integrated humor.
Okay, what's the difference?
Contiguous humor is a joke told at the beginning or the end of a lesson, merely to lighten the mood. It is completely unrelated to the core material. Integrated humor, however, embeds the joke directly into the learning material itself.
Which one is better?
While both have value in lowering the filter, studies suggest that for pure, unadulterated content retention, contiguous humor is actually safer. If poorly executed integrated humor falls flat, perhaps because the learner doesn't grasp the subtle cultural nuance of the pun, it can confuse them. They feel like they missed the joke, which makes them feel stupid, which ironically raises the extraneous cognitive load and slams the filter shut again.
That makes perfect sense. Kept the humor simple and adjacent to the learning, just to keep the vibes good. But let's go back to the physical panic for a second. Say I'm in that crowded cafe. The barista asks me a question, I don't have an island for it, and I feel my throat physically tightening up. The fight or flight is kicking in. Are there physical, biological hacks to lower the filter in that exact moment?
Yes, and for this, our sources borrow techniques from clinical speech therapy, specifically focusing on stuttering modification techniques adapted for language learners experiencing high-stress disfluencies.
Interesting.
When the affective filter spikes, the vocal tract, the muscles in your throat, jaw, and tongue, often physically tense up in anticipation of failure. You can actively counteract this by consciously employing light starts.
Light starts. How do I do that?
A light start means initiating your speech with a very gentle, low-tension voice onset, rather than trying to force or push the words out with a burst of air. You ease into the first syllable.
It sounds almost like driving a manual transmission car. If you just dump the clutch and slam the gas pedal, the engine stalls and jerks violently. A light start is easing your foot onto the gas pedal to get the momentum going smoothly.
They added an excellent mechanical comparison. Another clinical technique is smooth linking, where you focus entirely on blending the end of one word continuously into the beginning of the next, maintaining a constant, unbroken stream of airflow. This prevents the jerky, halting stops that trigger panic.
Smooth linking, got it.
And finally, simply utilizing flexible rate control, deliberately slowing your overall speech down by just 10 or 15%. This doesn't make you sound stupid, it sounds thoughtful. And that tiny reduction in speed gives your prefrontal planning circuits the vital microseconds they need to retrieve the appropriate language chunks from your basal ganglia without triggering an overload panic.
Okay, this is a massive paradigm shift. We have the neurological mechanics of memory, we have the chunks, the islands, the shadowing, and the psychological hacks to keep our filter down. We have all the puzzle pieces. But how do we package all of this together into a cohesive strategy? If someone's building a study routine, or if they're just trying to have better conversations, how do we guarantee that our brains stay hooked, the filter stays low, and the learning feels effortless?
For the ultimate packaging strategy, we actually have to step completely outside of traditional linguistics. We have to look at the modern masters of attention engineering and behavioral psychology.
You're talking about YouTube creators.
Exactly. Our sources include a comprehensive, data-driven framework from digital marketing strategist John Isaacson on how to master YouTube storytelling. The parallels to effective language acquisition and conversation are genuinely astonishing.
I love this angle. How do we treat our English journey like a viral Mr. Beast video? Let's unpack this YouTube framework.
Isaacson points out that the algorithm on platforms like YouTube is ruthless. It rewards watch time and audience retention above all else. If you lose the viewer's attention for even a few seconds, they click away and the video dies. Statistically, the absolute danger zone is the first 30 seconds. Up to 70% of viewer drop-off happens right at the beginning if the hook isn't compelling enough.
Which is exactly like human conversation. Think about networking events. If you walk up to someone and spend the first 30 seconds awkwardly clearing your throat, looking at the floor, and deploying boring dictionary phrases like, "Hello, my name is John, I am a man, the weather is acceptable today," their brain completely checks out. You've lost their attention. The algorithm of their brain has clicked away.
That is the exact parallel. The human brain is a highly efficient machine that aggressively filters out boring or predictable stimuli to conserve energy. To bypass that filter and hold attention, successful creators and charismatic speakers use a rigid four-part narrative structure: the hook, the problem, the solution, and the payoff.
How does that apply when I'm just trying to tell a story in English?
The hook, those crucial first 30 seconds, must grab attention immediately and create an open loop. It must ask a question or present a scenario that demands resolution. The problem section deepens the emotional investment by explaining why this situation matters and what the stakes are. The solution delivers the actual value, the action, or the information. And the payoff resolves the emotional tension you built in the hook, leaving the listener satisfied.
So wait, I can see how this works for making a video, but we are language learners, not content creators. How does YouTube pacing actually help me as a student wire English vocabulary into my brain?
If we connect this back to cognitive load theory, the mechanism becomes crystal clear. Remember germane load. the productive, desirable mental effort required to build deep neural schemas.
Yes, the good kind of load.
Germane load requires sustained, highly focused attention. But as we just established, the brain naturally tunes out repetitive or monotonous stimuli. To keep the brain engaged in germane processing, YouTube creators use psychological tools called curiosity gaps and pattern interrupts.
Pattern interrupts. That's when a video suddenly changes the camera angle, zooms in, throws up a graphic, or drops a sound effect.
Right.
It resets your attention.
Yes, in a fast-paced video, a pattern interrupt resets the brain's attention span every 30 to 60 seconds, preventing habituation. In language learning, whether you are designing your own daily study lesson or practicing your spoken language islands, you must structure the information similarly. If your job island is just a monotonic, chronological recitation of facts, I wake up, I go to work, I tap on a computer, I go home. Your own brain will get bored practicing it. Your affective filter will drift up out of sheer apathy, and your listener will tune out.
So when I am sitting down on Monday to write those 30 sentences for my language island, I shouldn't just write a dry Wikipedia article about my life. I need to engineer my island like a story. I need to build in narrative tension.
Precisely. You must engineer emotional beats into your English practice. Yeah. You start your island with a curiosity gap, maybe a strange thing that happened at your office. You move to a minor frustration or a problem you face in your daily tasks. You build to a hope or a solution, and you end with a satisfying, perhaps humorous payoff.
I love that.
When your study session or your resulting conversation follows a genuine emotional arc, you encode the English vocabulary vastly stronger. As the neurobiological research notes, the human brain remembers feelings and narrative arcs far better than it remembers isolated facts.
This is a total revelation for how to talk to people. When you speak English, don't clear your throat with boring filler words. Use a hook. Use a curiosity gap. Start your island by saying, "You will never guess what happened to me on the train today." You instantly command their attention. And when you structure your language islands like mini stories, you guarantee that native speakers will actively want to listen to you. And this is the magic trick. When you see a native speaker smiling, engaged, and eagerly hanging on your every word, what happens to your affective filter?
It completely evaporates. The positive social reinforcement and the connection you feel skyrockets your confidence. That confidence tells your amygdala you are safe, which keeps the filter pinned to zero, which allows even more language acquisition to occur naturally and effortlessly during the rest of the interaction. You create a magnificent, self-sustaining loop of fluency and confidence.
A self-sustaining loop of fluency, that is the holy grail. We have covered an incredible amount of ground today. We have completely dismantled the old, broken way of doing things.
It requires a fundamental structural shift in perspective. But the biological efficiency of this method is undeniable.
Let's do a quick overarching recap of this Stop Thinking, Start Talking masterclass. First, we have to ditch the obsession with grammar rules. That is all declarative memory, which creates the cognitive bottleneck that makes you freeze in the coffee shop. Instead, we have to embrace procedural memory. We do this by learning chunks, the formulaic sequences that make up 50 to 80% of natural speech, bypassing the need to build sentences from scratch.
Correct. And we organize those flexible chunks by building our language islands, those highly personalized, offline translated, and heavily rehearsed 30-sentence scripts about our actual lives, ensuring we always have safe, dry land to stand on during chaotic conversations.
Then we move from the brain to the body. We physically train our mouths to produce those islands using the shadowing technique, speaking concurrently with native audio to build rapid automatic motor memory while utilizing the phonological loop. We protect our mental state by actively lowering the affective filter, using humor, light starts, and smooth linking to keep the fight-or-flight anxiety at bay. And finally, we package our communication using the YouTube architecture of engagement hook, problem, solution, payoff, so that we hold attention, build our own confidence, and make our English unforgettable.
When you synthesize all of these distinct elements together, language learning ceases to be a painful academic exercise in rule memorization. It transforms into a highly optimized, neurologically aligned process of skill acquisition and human connection.
But before we officially wrap up, I want to leave the listener with something to chew on. Based on everything we've looked at today, our sources point toward a final, somewhat radical thought.
I am intrigued. This raises an important question. What is the logical extreme of these theories?
Well, we talked extensively about Stephen Krashen, right? He has another famous theory called the reading hypothesis, which states that massive amounts of comprehensible input, just reading and listening to things you actually understand and enjoy, is the primary driver of all vocabulary growth. We also talked about the difference between our tiny pool of active sentences for speaking and the massive pool of passive sentences we absorb.
Yes, the tens of thousands of sentences we acquire implicitly without ever trying to speak them.
So here is the mind-bending question. Is it possible that the absolute future of language learning could involve zero forced speaking practice in the early stages? If we completely eliminate the stress of premature output, keep the affective filter permanently at zero by never forcing a student to speak, and just flood the brain with highly engaging, humor-filled, YouTube-style comprehensible input, could we map the internal neural pathways so perfectly that the very first time you decide to open your mouth, months or even years later, a fully formed, flawlessly accented English sentence just pours out? Could true ultimate fluency be achieved entirely in silence?
That is a fascinating disruptive proposition. It challenges the traditional output hypothesis directly, suggesting that the silent period might not just be a brief beginner phase, but potentially the primary, solitary engine of language acquisition, provided the input is optimized correctly. It suggests that speaking isn't how you learn. Speaking is just the result of what you've learned. It certainly warrants deep exploration.
Something for you to mull over while you listen to your English audio loops tomorrow. At the very beginning of this deep dive, we talked about that terrifying freezing moment, that moment when the native speaker says, "How's it going?" or your brain blue screens.
The cognitive traffic jam.
But now you have the complete map. You know exactly where the traffic jam is happening. It's in your working memory, bogged down by trying to translate grammar rules. You know how to clear the road by using chunks and building your islands. You know how to tune the engine through the physical workout of shadowing. And you know how to actually enjoy the ride by lowering that filter and telling a compelling story. So go out there, stop overthinking the grammar, stop translating in your head, stop thinking, and start talking.